the first thing you're going to notice is everything is frozen. That's because I don't want my laptop to die. And the other thing, being that it's drum and bass, it should probably be at 170 BPM, but I can't play that fast. So the first thing I started with was this guitar tapping lead. I used Archetype Nolly. It's just like a crunchy setting with some delay and reverb, and it should go like this. So once I had that, then I layered it up with some synths using Hive, playing the exact same thing. There's a little bit of automation in the cutoff, as you can see here. That's just to make transitions seem much more smooth. I then layered it with another synth, this time with a panning effect, as you can see down here. Together they all sounded like this. After I had all my synths and guitars, I needed to add some drums, so I just found some loops on Reddit, to be honest. To give it a bit more body, I added just some normal EDM kick snare and some hi-hats, following the exact same thing. And the last drums I added were the Periphery 4 Get Good drums. Okay, the other thing I did with the drums was I changed the stereo positioning, like the width, with KHS Stereo, which is a free plugin. Put the drum and bass loops a little bit central. Same with the kick and snare, like I put a little central. Then I added some pads for some ambience using Hive again. I also used Valhalla Supermassive because I really like the reverb. The last thing I added was the bass. I just used some presets of Serum, to be honest. The DnB roller, I changed some of the octave and the cutoff and whatever. And then I also layered it with another, like a normal synth bass sound. So together this is what they sound like. One thing I did do with the bass was I sidechained it to a kind of a ghost kick that's not playing. So all together this is what it sounds like. Okay, so the last thing I added for the little transition part before the second riff is I used this Fab Filter Saturn Break My Loop 01, and it just gives that glitchy effect. I layered this same Saturn effect with the synth, the guitar, and the hi-hats. I added a sub bass drop. One of the sub basses has this bit crushing effect on it from Saturn again. Sounds kind of funny, so. Okay, so for the second riff, this part was heavily inspired by Tosin's Thump video. Okay, so for the drums, I did pretty much the same thing. Just layered up a bunch of drum sounds, used a different loop, something that sounded a bit heavier, and this is what it sounds like. Okay, so I'm kind of going to kill my laptop just to show the tones. Jesus Christ, it's on 70. So I used Archetype Rabia mainly because of this octaver. I just added some lower octaves and a very little bit of the higher octaves, and you get that kind of artificial guitar sound. So this is what the thumping riff sounds like, just the guitars. I layered the notes that I played during the thumping with this really heavy sound, and adding this sound makes anything sound like huge. So it's basically a fuzz, an octave, and there's no cabinet. I've turned it off and I put on a doubler. It should sound something like this. So it sounds really gross, but when you layer it with the thumping, I layered the guitars with these two heavy bass presets I could find on Serum. This is what the first one sounds like. I added this little wobbly thingy because I thought it sounded pretty funny and cool. This gave it that kind of drum and bass roller sound. And then the last thing is I did add a real bass guitar, which I did not show in my video. I used Parallax for the bass sounds and my Ibanez bass. Okay, so I'm going to play the second half of this riff. This is what it sounds like together. Okay, so for that ambient delay part, I just continued off the previous riff. So I play the same bass line with a less noisy bass, and it sounds like this. It has a bit of delay on it, just because the preset had it, to be honest, and it sounded cool. As the riff progresses, I added another bass playing kind of the same thing, just with shorter notes, and it was a much noisier bass. It sounds like this. So for some ambience, I gave it some sequential kind of ambience, sounds like this. And I layered that with a drone. And finally, I added the delayed riff using archetype Abasi, and I used the 1/8 note dotted delay, and it gave me that Rob Scallon rain tone. I also panned it a bit, and I added an auto filter for when it kicks in so that the transition's not too, jarring. I layered the guitar with a synth running through RC20, which is just the best thing for lo-fi sounds. Just before I went into the next riff, I automated the reverb and just made it much wetter. And finally, for the drums, I kept it really simple, just a hi-hat pattern. And then I layered the accents with a kick. So together they should all sound like this. Okay, so for the next part, again, it's the same thing with the drums, just changing the loop, and it should sound like this. I kept the clean delayed riff playing throughout, and I also added chorus onto the guitar. Okay, so the riff will be called solo area guitar because I was planning to add a solo, but I got lazy. This is what the guitar sounds like. So what I do with the guitars is, after adding the archetype Rabia preset, they always say it's like plug and play, but you always have to make changes, and these are the changes that work for me. So I add a compressor. So yeah, these are the settings I put on the compressor: just threshold, some attack, add some gain, add a multiband compressor and increase everything a little bit. And then the last thing I do is I add an EQ. This is what my EQ curve looks like. I don't know if it's right, but it just kind of works for me, so I go with it. Then I layered it with the bass. And also a synth bass to give it that electronic dirtiness. It's kind of a vocal bass, and I think it works here. And then the last thing I did is I added some post-rock ambience. This is something you hear in every Djent song. It's basically delay in the front of the chain, so that becomes really uncontrollable, and this is what it sounds like. And together this is what they all sound like. So for the final outro, I got a little lazy and kind of just used the same riff 4 different ways, just to, increase the heaviness and change the dynamics a little bit. So I started off with these basses with a bit of glide on them. The first bass is a little bit more low end, and the second bass is a much noisier bass, which is like good for building the intensity. Sounds like this. And the second bass. For the ambience in this part, I just played the same riff as the bass, but with this kind of ARP setting, and this is what it sounds like. Again, a little bit of panning, some saturation. I layered this ambience with some kind of evolving pads, and this is what it sounds like. I used pigments for this. There's a little sonar sound when the riff transitions, sounds like this. And then another weird kind of ambient ARP. And finally a synthesizer that I got from Serum. It just sounded better than any of the, samples that I had. The last thing for this section is I added a drum loop with a little bit of filter cutoff. Then this loop chugging preset from FabFilter Saturn, which gave it a really, this weird noises. So together this is what they all sound like. For the second half of this riff, it's basically how I wrote it. I first started like directly after this. directly after that I'd started playing this on guitar, and then I realized it didn't fit there and kind of changed its position around. So for this part there's no palm muting, and this is what it sounds like. Again, I added a lot of that sub octave and higher octave from the archetype Rabea. I also layered it with another guitar. Okay, so it's named center, but it's not actually in the center. I used the doubler effect and pushed it out wide, and this is what it sounds like. So I layered the guitars with this synth bass. It's kind of a Moog Taurus-y type of bass. Sounds like this. And also a normal bass. And this is what it sounds like together. For the third variation of the riff, I played the same riff, but this time I added some palm muting and I filtered the guitar out. If you look at the previous part, you can see that the EQ8 is not activated, but when it comes here, it gets activated. So I filtered it out and I started panning it a little bit more central, so I could have the Djent-y guitars all the way left and right. So this is what the filtered out riff sounds like. Then I layered the Djent guitar over it. Now again, for the Djent guitar, you can see I've done a lot of chopping. That's because I wanted it as tight as possible, but it's still not that tight because I guess running through my interface is a little bit of noise. I added another bass on top of that, a synth bass, a little bit milder one, sounds like this. The last thing is I changed the drum and bass loop up a little bit, and it sounds like this. Just for each part, depending on the intensity I need, I just choose a different loop. So this is what they all sound like together. Now for the last part, the drums are just the Periphery 4 kit and the normal kick and snare layer. It sounds like this. This is what the guitars sound like. It's again the same tone, just here and there I may have added some more gain, taken some low end out, added some low end in. Right, that part's very funny to me. So for the scrape, I did add another layer of scraping in a different harmonic area, I guess, what it sounds like. And this is that, typical Gojira kind of scrape. And the other funny sound I added was this little tapping thing where like each guitar or each synth is playing chromatically one note ahead, so it just becomes like really dissonant and funny and like alien core-y. And I layered a lot of harmonies on that. I don't even know if you can call it harmonies, to be honest. And this is what they all sound like together. So I first layered the bass with like a normal sounding synth bass, and this is what it sounds like. So for the second bass layer, I added this exact preset, bass preset from Serum, and it's really vocal, so I thought it sounded really cool. So together they all sound like this. So you have to just end it, just a couple of things that I did almost everywhere in every track, just to give it a little bit different feeling. Stuff like the filter cutoff, stuff like this. Then a lot of the panning stuff. Then a lot of frequency automations to make transitions much smoother so that it just doesn't randomly kick in, it just builds in. Then anywhere I could, I tried to add risers and falls. That's what it sounds like. And then the last thing is I had two reverb channels, one for the real instruments, which I kind of always ran through the drum reverb, so it kind of gives you the feeling that everybody's playing in one room, and then a general reverb for all my ambience and all that. Right, now that everything is done, I'm just trying to do something new with my YouTube channel. I'm not really comfortable talking on a mic. I can actually hear myself and it's gross. But yeah, I'm not like some pro producer. This video is basically to help people, if they can learn something, it's cool. If you need to get out of some kind of writer's block, which I get all the damn time, then it's even better. Just try something different, I guess. Just drop any comments with any criticism, constructive or just call me a piece of shit. It's okay. And yeah, just let me know what all changes you would like me to make. I know one thing is I freeze my tracks, and that's because I really need my laptop to work for another couple of years. So yeah. Okay, I guess like and subscribe.